Okay, it's recording.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the Financial Review Committee meeting of September 13th, 2021. Madam Secretary, will you please provide a roll call?
When your name is called, please answer with here or present. Member Amesqua?
Present.
Member Federico?
Here.
Member Killebrew?
Present.
Vice Chair Frost?
Here.
Chair Mitchell?
Present.
For the record, all members of the Financial Review Committee are present.
We will move on to public comments. There will be a 3-minute time limit per person and an overall time limit of 15 minutes for the public comments portion of the agenda. All comments will be directed to the Financial Review Committee and shall not consist of any personal attacks. Members of the public are expected to maintain a professional, courteous decorum during their comments. State law prohibits the Financial Review Committee from taking action on a specific item unless it appears on the agenda. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments?
We have no public comments at this time.
We will now move forward to new business. Item 1, approval of the minutes from April 27th, 2021 Financial Review Committee meeting.
I'll move to approve the minutes. Second.
Can I call for a vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all. So, because this is just audio recording, I just want to make sure, by consensus, this motion passes 5-0.
Perfect. On to this item number 2, quarterly financial reporting ending June 30th, 2021. Staff report, please.
This is the quarterly financial report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021. We ended with actuals at 41.3 million, which is about 3 million higher than the amended budget, and about also 3 million higher than last year. Those are for revenues. For expenditures, about 36.5 million was our ending out of a 39 million budget. That was about 2.5 million less than budgeted and 3.2 less than the prior year.
And in regards to expenditures, from that amount that's under budget, we're going to be proposing next week to carry over just under $300,000 of contracts that are continuing. So the net amount's just under $3 million. Bottom line.
Any discussion from the committee?
The $8 million we're getting from the Fed, that we still have $4 million coming this next month. Okay, that's right.
Yeah, so part of the positive news on the revenue side was when we did our revenue projections, we didn't know what the American Rescue Plan Act was going to actually get us. And our early calcs had us right at getting $6 million. We didn't know at the time either that it was going to be, well, we just learned right before going to council with our budget amendment for the revenues that we were going to get $6 million, $3 million in each year.
Yep.
And by the time they got done calculating it and throwing some of the cities out of the discussion that ended up getting money directly as opposed to the state allocation, we ended up getting $8 million, $4 million a year. So $1 million better than what we had anticipated back in March. And then our FY22 budget that we are in now has also had the other $3 million of the 6. So we also already have good news on that front.
Yeah, that's
We'll
right.
be asking the council next week to amend the revenue budget to add that million. So good news. I do want to point out at the end of last year that we finished with fully funded reserves. Next week, when we take the rollover report that rolls over the contracts and ask for budget for them, I'm also going to be recommending that we not transfer that surplus from last year at this point in time, which we have a city council policy that says when you have a surplus transferred out of and you exceed your reserve requirements in the general fund, transfer it over in the capital projects fund into our community investment account. I'm going to be recommending next week that we leave it in the general fund at this time until we see, one, how this first half of this year gets going with our TOT revenues, but also CalPERS, as we sit here right now, is currently discussing what to do with their 21%. And I'll talk about a little bit more in the next one. 21% earnings from this year that just closed for them, and starts getting factored in next year's actuarial evaluations and the following year's payments. So we'll get a better idea of where our unfunded liability is. And I'm saying that because our next agenda item will talk about our actuarials and possibly, or not possibly, but the steps we want to take to fund the Section 115 account to address the unfunded liability. So kind of leave all those in play, see how COVID treats us in the hotels, if the group business in particular starts rebounding. And then probably our mid-year report that's in March of next year, we'll be able to kind of button up how much to transfer over to the community investment account, how much to put into the Section 115 account, and anything else that might take place. So kind of still playing it conservative doesn't make sense to me. We can transfer it now and then just take an action to transfer it back later, or just leave it. It's just more gymnastics with the economy as opposed to just wait and see. It's a good problem to have. So I don't see any need to rush into making a decision at this point in time. So we did finish, I think, what was it, 6 million better on, actually, we finished FY21 at June 30 with almost $6 million better in our unassigned fund balance. That is on top of already having $4 million set aside for our Section 115 account funds to address our unfunded liability. So in good shape.
So the 4 million ARPA, where is it? Where does it sit?
General fund, right in unassigned fund balance. ARPA came with its own interesting view of the world, given that the feds are the ones, and the Fed staff are the ones that crafted how it gets put together. Limited what you can spend the money on, so you can't spend it on pensions, you can't pay down unfunded liabilities, you can't put it into reserves. So we're reporting that we spend it on police services, homeless services, senior services. During the year, we did not have to use reserves last year. So in my view of the world and the way they are addressing this, we're totally compliant with that. And we're doing the same this year. So we'll have to show what we're going to spend the second $4 million on. And it'll be on the $1 million a month sheriff's contracts. And we'll have 4 of those to submit as paperwork for them to audit and be done. So we don't have to pull together a bunch of different crazy things.
So the 4 million, as far as the Fed audit is concerned, reporting was spent?
Yep.
What was the deadline to spend it?
It's not a deadline, it's a starting date of March 3rd. So it was effective March 3rd, you can start spending it. So we were spending it on police services contracts. We made the
March, April, May, June, in 4 months you spend it?
Yeah. We've got more than enough eligible expenses to really run it. I don't foresee any local government having to give back money because they didn't have eligible expenditures. If you want to look at something that's even crazier is how they calculate, because we want to look at our first criteria is we had a revenue loss, and then if you had a revenue loss, then you can have it for these types of things. So our revenue loss, the way they calculate, was based on a calendar year actuals historically through FY19 pre-pandemic, and then you can, to project your losses, you take your calendar year, that number, is it a 5-year average? No, you take it and you project forward using.
She said 3-year average.
3 fiscal years, and then your base year was calendar year 20.
Calendar year 20. So the gymnastics of figuring out how much did we actually lose. When I say we lost $14 million, that's based on what we thought we were going to get. And when I use their formula, it comes out a much different number. But we have to use their formula. So we've gone through their gymnastics and crossed T's and dotted I's. So. And we also just got a report back today that our use of CARES Act
The
funds that came from the state, they blessed what we submitted. So I think we're on the path to proving that we spent the money on what they said we could spend it on.
Good.
Perfect. Any other discussion?
A few
Jamie?
questions. Interesting just to see that property tax this quarter is our #1 revenue source. It's the first time in a long, long time, right?
First time since
You've been here, probably.
Yeah.
Are the purchase and sales transfer tax, are the transfer taxes included in property tax?
No, it's a separate line item.
Where's that?
In your attachments.
First
I'm just
attachment.
looking at the
Oh, okay.
the overall quarterly financial report, the sort of flyer that you guys do. Is it in there, or is it not
I
mentioned?
think we mentioned it.
Okay,
No, you'll see it in next week's report.
we'll see. It
It's
doesn't
not
matter.
typically,
Doesn't
it's
matter.
not one of our top revenues.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. More interestingly for me on property tax, we know there's been a ton of sales and turnovers of properties. Do we anticipate? I'll give you an anecdote. A home in my neighborhood, Maury Hanson's home sold in my neighborhood. My guess is his basis was about 250 grand and it sold
Yeah,
for
we do.
1.2 million.
We do that.
And we sort of can project out what we're gonna see in increases. I realize we're only getting 7-something cents on the dollar anyway.
Yeah,
but
we've got a running toll of about 20 years of history, and then it's throwing a dart, but knowing that as long as property values are increasing and the county assessor isn't going to make a decision to accept a bunch of appeals or unilaterally, which they did a couple of years ago, also not increase property taxes. We know we're gonna get the 2% base growth, and then we've got a guess at what is above that. And we've known for the last 6 years that, like this last year, we knew we were gonna see a bunch of Monarch Bay parcels selling because the long-term, the
Lease.
50-year leases, the underlying leases
Yeah.
were expiring, and we knew that there were terms in those lease deals that were very beneficial if the existing lessees wanted to buy the property at the end of their lease, which was 60% of market value. Kind of silly not to find somebody to partner with if you couldn't get the financing to buy it. So we did see this past year, and we had expected a bunch of turnover, and it tripled our. We usually bet on transfer tax about $450 a year, and we were north of. I think we were right at 1.3 million.
1.2.
1.2. We expect to see more of that this year as things come through. Good thing to have. And then every time we have one of our big resorts sell, we'll see a slug of money. So last we heard the Marriott, for instance, is on the market. So if that sells for $300 million, we're good.
But more importantly to me though, the actual property tax, as the basis goes up on these, someone's tax goes up significantly. From 1,000 a year to 10,000 a year.
We'll see the actuals in our supplementals when the properties sell and everything gets through the county. And yeah, we do monitor it. So we basically, I think for this year, I think I had about a 4%. We're gonna beat that.
Okay.
We're probably gonna be maybe even north of 5. We do get the assessment numbers for the following calendar year right at the end of June of each year. So 6 months out, we'll know what will actually be on the roll, but what we don't know is interim transfers that happened after they took their snapshot of all the properties in town. And their lien date is January 1 of each year. So 6 months prior, we know what the assessed roll is going to be, but there's constantly the noise, in essence, that is all the interim transfers.
Safe to say that number is going to grow.
And it has been
significantly, the 5% range probably for this next fiscal year. Because homes are still selling.
Yeah, but you're looking at a pretty big tax base, and, you know, the
Yeah,
number,
so it's watered down.
very much so.
Okay. My only other question is on TOT. Mike, how are the hotels tracking like right now? Are they still trending up, or are they starting to?
Set records in June and July and some in August. Doing very well. The Marriott's still lagging its historic numbers. Looked like there was some softening in, I heard, I haven't got the numbers yet, but expect some softening in the Ritz and the Waldorf coming up here. But they were all hitting crazy numbers. So I think we're already over about $1 million ahead of what I had projected monthly for this year. But, you know, what are we gonna see in group business is really my concern starting next month, starting in October.
Was there any decent? I know there were a few big groups that were scheduled for the summer. Did those all go off? Well, do you know?
Yeah, but some of those groups actually supplanted what would have been normal, just regular transient vacations as opposed to groups. The hotels don't typically do a bunch of group business in the summer because they make so much off of the individuals.
Okay.
And it's, from what we're hearing, it's still fairly soft on the group business, but they are seeing some come back. And you can also tell by when we sit in on the Visit Dana Point board meetings, their focus is push on group business. So they're making a lot of investments to book groups.
Okay, thank you.
Any other?
Just one question on the savings of police service. Is that permanent? Is that that's not permanent?
So interesting. The department had a bunch of retirements, and we were running short in several positions. So the way our contract is, we've got X number of badges that we pay for. I think 19 or 20 of them are on patrol, and the rest are doing other things. When we're down a patrol deputy, typically we'll just call somebody in from somewhere else to work an overtime shift, and overtime is cheaper than full-time. So if we've got somebody that got promoted out on patrol here and then works somewhere else, and we backfill them with overtime, it's about 50 cents. It's about 25 cents on the dollar savings. Well, we had a lot of that last year, where a lot of our folks, we had some retirements. We had one medical that he still hasn't come back, and we had promotions, and backfilling them with full-time people was very difficult. So we've got, separate from those regularly scheduled patrol, we've got 3 deputies and a sergeant that are in our community services unit that do not respond to calls for service. They're just out fighting crime. We were pulling them in on overtime shifts for patrol. So we already paid for them, so we got a dollar for dollar savings basically. And then that included a sergeant that worked patrol for 6-7 months and was kind of pulling double duty. So, one sergeant's $250,000, so it's not hard to rack up savings. Right now, I think we just got an update from the chief. She's got 1 vacant position, so she's been filling, but there's some promotion that's coming up that we expect to lose some badges again. So we'll have savings this year again. Not $1 million. That was unheard of. I've seen 400,000 in years past, but $1 million was definitely an anomaly. And we've got something that they haven't published yet, that they're coming out with the body-worn cameras, and we still don't know what the price tag's going to be.
How many badges do we have?
36. 36.
That's what we pay for. So how many are on the beat?
Hang on, do I have 36 right? 1, 2, 3. Well, we've got 19 on the beat. We've got 2 that are up that are assigned. The 19 doesn't include the motor officers, so 20. We've got 2 that are up at Southwest. got an investigator detective types, got a chief, we've got the 4 in the CSU unit, we've got an admin deputy and admin sergeant. So pretty robust non-patrol group, but that's the structure that we're offering.
I'll save the editorial for later.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually didn't know, when I first heard, oh, we're paying for overtime, of course I thought. But then, you're right, the way you explained it, it's not a bad deal.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't run them ragged.
the benefits, the overhead on a deputy is, I think, about 110%, if I'm not mistaken. So when you bring somebody in on overtime, it's 1.5 times their salary. So, I mean, $2.10 versus $1.50, you're saving 60 cents.
Yeah.
So, and we did a lot of that last year, a lot.
Any other committee discussions?
Nothing.
Okay, should I call for a motion, please?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
Yeah, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. By consensus, this motion passes 5-0.
On to the next item, CalPERS pension actuarial report or update, staff reports.
All right, I will head this one up this time. We'll be pressing C into doing these things in the future. They'll be tapped to.
Lucky you, see, try to explain complicated actuarial stuff to
Well, I'm gonna keep this
me
real
and Mike
simple.
Frost.
Please.
Those two get it, we maybe not so much.
This was a hard report to read.
So we get these every year. And every year I get to read through them and relearn what a lot of the stuff means, but there's a couple of numbers in here that, basically just have to pay attention to, so. Our unfunded liability is one of them, so if I can have you turn to page 13 of the first CalPERS report, there's actually 2 here. So we have 2 pension plans. We have both actuarial reports included in here. They're one behind the other. The first plan deals with what are known as classic members, which were members of employees that were members of PERS prior to October 1, 2013. So there was a Pension Reform Act of 2013 that the state legislature passed that said any new employees after that date that have never been in the CalPERS plan before, you get less benefits. So they split we have 2 plans now, one for the old timers and one for the newer employees. The old timers one, the classic one, I'm gonna look at page 13 here. And the top section of that says plans funded status. So my intent of bringing this is the bottom line is to let you know we're gonna be putting out a request for proposals to set up a section 115 account, which is where we'll park money and have it invested, and it will be available to help contribute toward our pension payments, but with the express intent to address our unfunded liability over time. You will notice on this report, and it's based on the 2019 earnings through 2019. So they take a snapshot and it takes 2 years. Almost a year, a little over a year to actually produce the report, and the effects of it on your rates happens that following year, so 2 years out. You will notice at the top of this report, our plans funded status went from 6.5 million to 7.4 million. So we have an unfunded liability that grew substantially, and it was based on CalPERS underperforming in its investments that prior year that's been measured here. What's happened this last year, where they had a 20%, we're not going to see it for a couple of years. So that 7.3 million will come down a little bit. But I sent you guys, you all an email the other day about CalPERS starting today is having meetings. And one of the things they're talking about is they have an asset liability management plan policy that they adopted a couple years ago that basically said if the pension funds earn a bunch of money, they're going to look at lowering the discount rate, which increases the liability. Basically says we have less than we otherwise compute. I sent you this because they're having the discussions, but there's a lot of agencies, a lot of other cities that are fighting back, particularly larger agencies that are saying don't lower the discount rate, don't increase our payment requirements. We're having tough times. I don't think our city would support doing that. I think it's not such a bad thing to not have such rosy projections on what they're going to earn on their investments. So their discussion right now, according to their asset liability management plan, because of their earnings exceeded, I believe it's 10%, supposed to trigger a reduction in their projections from their current 7% down to 6.8. That's not factored into any of this. And I honestly don't think it's going to really play into what we're discussing as far as taking out our unfunded liability. But you'll see how drastically our unfunded liability can change when they don't hit their investment targets. In fact, if you look in the next section down, you will see that just the unfunded liability portion payment for FY 22-23 on the report we're working under now says that next fiscal year we're going to be paying $570,000 toward unfunded liability, toward that $7.4 million unfunded liability. So they're amortizing it over time. They're charging us right now 7% interest on our unfunded liability. That it actually went up because of this change in our unfunded liability. Last year's report had it at $545,000, so it went up $25,000 in 1 year, which is substantial when you look at the base number being 500,000. It's a pretty big increase. When they were already assuming increases built in, so this is on top of what was normally projected. So this is our big nut that we're going to be looking at, 7.4 million. I think it's probably a safe number to target as far as taking money out of the city and throwing it over to CalPERS. I'll be talking to you also about, if you look on pages 12 and 13, you'll see how that $7.4 million unfunded liability is actually what it's made up of. And if you go, it actually layers it in. So every year they have either a change in assumptions, or they hit or exceed or don't hit their investment targets. They have a number that's the gain or loss for that year, and they amortize it in over X number of years. They quote ramp it in over time at some points. They don't start, if it's a 20-year amortization, they may not start on year one of an amortization with 1/20th. They might do 1/3 of that 1/20th, and then 2/3 of a 1/20th the next year, and then go to a full ramp-in. So I think they've got up to 5-year ramp-ins on some of them. But you'll see each year you either have a prior year loss that they're amortizing in, or a gain. So we'll be looking at some of these individual, they call them layers or bases, and talking about possibly writing a check directly to PERS to take out some of those layers, particularly the longer terms. And it'll lower our unfunded liability, and the rest of it we still have in a section 115, invested for several years, and then we'd be looking to set a target of how much do we want to pay out of the general fund still every year toward an unfunded liability. So there'll be an ongoing contribution from the general fund, but we're looking to take the top off of what is an increasing number. I think it, right now, I don't have a chart in front of me, but probably increases to about 2034 until it hits the top of the bell curve, and then as amortization bases drop off, it'll start coming back down, and then sometime around 2040, there's actually a table
Page 22.
there. You go. In 2044, we'd be making our last payment based on the current schedule. So I think we're gonna wanna pick something where we top off the curve. We still target a 2044 payoff at this point in time, and this could change. But we're gonna be looking right now, the top of the curve is 835,000 a year, not doing anything different. And we'd be looking to, I don't know what the magic number is, if it's $500,000 still coming out of the general fund every year. We look to grow a section 115 for a couple of years and then start taking the top off the curve. I don't know.
Considering we ramp,
Some of them ramp, and they could change it, by the way. That's part of their discussion right now with this 20%. They may come up with a whole, not just changing their future projections, they may change how they're amortizing it in. They could say, oh, we're gonna help all the big agencies out and amortize in this gain over 5 years.
yeah, that help in the short run.
In the
Yeah.
short term, yeah.
I was gonna say with the ramp, when theoretically the top, we can try to take the top off, but it's actually just moving.
No, we're still shooting for the same end date. We're just trying to take the top off the growth. So right now you see it's growing every year and it goes up to 826.
Yeah, but
We
next,
might work to try and take 300,000 off of the top of that at this point in time.
It
let's
seems,
say for the next 2 years though, CalPERS blows it, and they're gonna ramp that, so then that's just pushing the ramp, that's
It
just
will
pushing
always
the top.
be a moving target. And every time we make a decision to address it, we'll be at that point in time.
Yeah.
When they move to 6.8% or even keep trying to take it down, that ramp goes up.
Way up, that's right, yeah.
it seems based on the report that you emailed out last week that the League of California Cities is gonna try to push for solutions now, so.
Yeah, because they represent every California city, and we all write checks to be members, and the checks are based on how big we are. And what we need to respect here, though, is that the CalPERS board does have governor appointees on it, but it's also made up, I think, a majority, including union members. So to the extent that they saw the light, 6 years ago when Pepper came through, that they need to worry about the solvency of their pensions, the lower those projections are in CalPERS numbers, the safer their pensions are. So there's a balance. How much do I want in my pocket today? Nobody anymore is talking about enhancing benefits, which was a big thing 24 years ago, when they said, look, CalPERS is super funded, reduce everybody's payments so that the cities and counties will have more money, and boom, we can give it all to public safety with enhanced 3% at 50 pension plans, 2.7 at 55, enhanced miscellaneous pension plans. Nobody's talking about that now. Now you've had enough, forget the guy's name, Joe, the professor from Stanford, yelling that this model doesn't work, it's gonna be upside down. There's been enough people clamoring about how stupid it was to have 8.25% rates in their projections. They're down to 7 now. I could see them at some point going to 6, so it's just gonna cost us more. But the volatility is gonna be a lot less too.
Yeah.
Assuming they can hit 6% easier.
Yeah, I think so. If you look at CalPERS performance over the last 20 years, they use that to do like a simulation of what should we expect in the future. The number is like 635, 660. So the fact that it's based on history, and history doesn't guarantee future performance, but clearly the 7% is too high. And there's a lot of other independent retirement systems that are already below 7%, like San Diego, I think it's maybe 650, others are going to 675. I think it is 100% given that CalPERS is going to 675 this fall, maybe 650. So the 21% gain, I think they can spend it all and get you down to 650 if they spend it all. So they're going to spend your 21% gain and spend it on bringing down the actuarial rate, which they kind of have to. The alternative from what you sent around is try to chase the 7%. And CalPERS, this isn't recorded, is it? I mean,
It is.
they have a terrible performance record, really, when you think about it. But like, it's terrible. Like they get into private equity and then they get out. They're in real estate and then they're out. But it's like, it's like they react to the market, and smart investors never react. They kind of ride the wave because this is the market, right? So you don't want PERS to feel like they have to chase 7% because the result is they can underperform all the time. So now they're talking about what you last said, like using leverage, borrowed money. So let's try to hit the 7% by going to borrow money so that we have more money invested. But if the market goes down, which it undoubtedly will, we're going to take their first loss, 100% of the loss on the borrowed money, because borrowed money you've got to pay it in full. So I think almost everyone is under the assumption and recognition that PERS is going down. I'd be shocked if they lowered to 675. I think they go to 650. And then, as Mike was talking about, gains are usually smoothed or losses over 5 years. They have a ramp up. But a cut in the actuarial rate is immediate. So last I heard is there as a gesture of good faith, is they're going to merge the two bases, the two layers that you were talking about, so that the cities don't have to wait for the 5-year ramp up to benefit from 21% gain, and they get hit immediately by the cut in rate. So if they merge them together, now you either ramp it or you don't, but the city should not feel the pain. You're not going to get affected, and then because they're emergent. So the timing of the benefit of the 21% and the cost of cutting the rate is going to happen simultaneously. The last thing I will say is just look at the CalPERS performance. I think it's in here, their historical performance in some of these charts. But whenever they have 21% gains, sometimes they have a follow-up 15% gain, what have you. But then there's usually a drop. So I think everybody
usually had nothing to do with what they were actually doing.
No,
it's the economy.
There's going to be
like last year.
There's no question that we will have a market correction, bear market. It's just a question of when and how long will it last.
Well, and
then there'll be a bull market.
They had a downturn at the end of 20 because of COVID hit.
Yeah.
It's not like they went and sold everything. What did everything do this last year? You went down into a hole, you came out of the hole, that's the end, you gained.
And it's always going to be like that. So the question is, what are they going to do? I think they cut the rate because they know that they're going to have some like negative loss years in the next 5 years. So my question is on the slide here where you were talking about your peak payments. Has the city ever considered the alternate schedules? Because this is like saying I have a 15-year mortgage or a 10-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage. The way to save a ton of money is to pay it quicker because they are charging you 6%. Even 650 seems like a ton of money. And building reserves is so important, but your reserves, like right now, they earn 1%, and then you're paying them 7%. It's like the worst time ever. If we had
we have in the past.
Yeah.
We had an unfunded liability. I think it was back in 2013 before Capra. We had cash, and council agreed to pay it out. I think it was like $900,000. So we had no unfunded liability. And then when the actuarials came out from Capra, unfunded liability, we just happened to go through a few years of perceived financial turmoil here. So pulling the trigger on anything, we were set up in spring of 19. We were going to probably pay down some of the we were gonna do the same thing by paying off some of the amortization, some of the bases.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit, and it was just like, we had no idea what the hell we were facing, so we sat on the money.
Yeah, because we had talked about that.
We were ready to go. We were literally we were teed up to send out RFPs, bring it back, and we were gonna try and execute June of 2019. That was the game plan, and we had it talked about with the FRC for 8 months. We were ready to go, and then the council put $5 million aside at the time to do it, and then COVID hit, and we did use $1 million out of the 5 in FY20, and that's where we're at today. Everything's just been kind of wait and see. We're in good shape. We're ready to go again.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, and I like the schedule too. If we can't make 6.5 in the section 115, why not just pay it now? Why not? What about some, like, sort of financial policy that says, hey, if we have an unfunded liability, we always make payments relative to assuming a 15-year amortization to pay it off? What if that was some sort of, I don't know, perhaps CalPERS next year misses so bad that then budgeting becomes problematic, but.
Well, the budgeting, assuming they're always amortizing losses over 20 years, you're gonna have numbers come up where you're gonna have to make payments. But if we were to pay it off today, you're starting from no unfunded liability. And if they lose money and, if they lose 10%, they're amortizing it over 20 years, you're gonna be making, doing straight math here, but, half of 1% repayment on that with the 7%, whatever the rate is, loan on that.
But by year 5, you'll have a gain, and then it's gonna offset, and I mean, the whole.
So let me go back to why we're looking at 115 trusts also instead of just paying it off. I think there was a desire on the council to not put all of our eggs in one basket. CalPERS is trying to chase the 7% right now. So in an effort to move the ball forward, I think the FRC, we put the money over into section 115, we can never take it back. It can only go toward pension. Now we could supplant a regular annual investment, but we're controlling the investment strategy to what we choose. We'll choose like probably 4% investment mix is would be their target. I think they've got 2 options right now, 4 and 5. Their normal approach is trying to hit the 7. So we can choose a more conservative with whatever section 115 provider we go with. But, the thought was don't put it all into PERS, they're just gonna lose it. There's a chance they're gonna lose it, that doesn't make sense. The chances of them hitting 6.5% in the long run, I think are pretty good.
Pretty good, yeah.
So
yeah, I think you're basically.
we could be done with this discussion and pay $7.4 million in a couple months.
So the risk with that strategy though is if you give it a PERS and they kill it for the next couple of years, you're like, wow, we just did like something fantastic, and then you're overfunded.
But you don't get credit for it.
They don't give you the money. Yeah, they keep it. We're overfunded.
We're in a pool. If we had our own plan and they did that, awesome. But we're not a big enough agency.
So you have to wait for the underperformance or actuarial rate changes so that you can absorb that. So it's a cushion. It's money in the bank. So some people don't like to be overfunded because then the unions will say, give us more because you're overfunded. So the 115, let me just say one thing about your 115 is that it is like a hedge. Because if you keep some in the 115 trust and it only earns 3%, and CalPERS or 650, 10, whatever, you're like, oh, I should have given it all to them. But if they underperform and they have which we know they will at some point, because the market will just be down, and they're like 0 or 1%, 0 or negative, you're like, at least we have that in the 3%. So what do you want? I mean, do you want the hedge, or do you just want to give it all to them and ride that wave?
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I have some questions. Are you still going on the brief, or are we good for it?
Okay.
So, to Raul's point, So, by the way, I am 100% still in favor of putting money into a 115 trust for no other reason than the hedge, right? We have different investments. Hopefully, when they're not doing well, we're at least making 3.5%. There's a delta there. I'm willing to accept that little bit of difference for all the other reasons we talked about. But do we get to pick on that page 22 there on the right there, Mike? Do we get to pick which amortization schedule?
Yep.
I would really like to discuss why we wouldn't choose the 15-year amortization with the 115 trust and just see what that looks like. You know, we can put the money into the trust. Yeah, we'd have to bump up 230 grand next year. Hypothetically, the numbers don't change. We can pull that out of what we put in the trust. But really, that amount we go up decreases every year, and by year 6, 7, we're not spending any more than we were on the regular amortization, and we're saving we're saving $1.327 million in interest payments down there at the bottom over the life of that. It's a lot of money.
If you could afford to do that, it's the easiest way to save a ton of money on your watch.
I think the 10-year is probably a tough one to get there. I mean, I'd like to see what it does to, the reality is.
Well, we'll be running models. So we did contract with GovInvest. So we've got all of our pension data dumped into their magic spreadsheet thing. It's actually the same one that the CalPERS actuary uses. And we'll be able to pick different ones and see the result on our payments. So we'll be dropping those in. We just had a meeting with them a couple of weeks ago. So we'll be able to pick and choose which bases we pay off. But we could even go with a policy that says we're always going to go with 15-year. They call them fresh starts. So we're going to change everything we have to 15-year. But I would want to do it probably concurrent with paying off. It's kind of like you're picking the pain that you want the general fund to incur each year. You can have the policy of 15-year amortizations and then pick which bases to pull out here.
But in tough economic down cycles, you could use a 115 trust, right? If the budget was under strain.
Yeah, but
15 amortization payment.
Part of the way the council's been looking at things the last couple of years is we need to recognize, COVID was something special, but we need to change operations when times get tough. You don't just hide stuff and push off problems. You're kind of balancing the whole thing, but that's why we have the policy that we fund facilities and capital improvement programs as part of the base budgeting discussion. Because you go to almost any other government I've ever seen, when budget times got tough, this is the first thing that gets cut: investment in your streets, because you're not going to see it for 15 years. But this council, you don't have to ask the council today to make tough choices, and our policies have kind of gone the opposite. So I think that it's important to keep the general fund on the hook and always have the discussion about it, about the unfunded liability, so it doesn't just kind of get swept. It's a problem for future council and management to work on. Your point about us only earning 1% right now and getting charged 7% was the reason why in 2013 we paid off. That was how I sold it to the council. Was let's take this almost $1 million, and pay it off, because we're only earning 4%, and they're charging us at the time I think it was 7.5%, and then started fighting at 8, 7.75%. And then you start coming down, and it's like that's free money. We're 3% a year on $1 million, and we didn't have to do anything, and we don't need it right now, so let's do it. Today we're 6% we're paying. And it absolutely makes 0 sense, especially if we've got the money. So we can take an interim step here too, and in addition to moving forward with our section 115 discussion, I could expedite trying to pick amortization basis to pay off now, and we can move forward on that piece of it.
I think that would be a good idea.
Simply writing a check.
Yeah. I most definitely don't have the crystal ball, as no one else does, but I figure
Well, they're
You know.
charging us 7% regardless.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah,
Whether
but,
they're making money today or not, they're charging us 7%.
but the concern of like, how are they gonna perform going forward? I bet yes, there'll be a correction because of course there always is. How long will it last? But with more ARPA money coming and more Fed money, being spent into 22, I don't think the correction happens till the Fed stops spending money, the Federal Reserve starts raising rates, then you're gonna feel the like, ooh, how bad is it gonna be? 10-20% correction, but I think you're good for another year. What I'm trying to say is, the worst thing to do is give them money and then they tank. Because in the way it works, if I'm not mistaken, is you give them money today, you won't know how it performed till the June 30 of 22. That's when they'll decide what rate they're gonna pay you on that money you gave them today. Because it goes by fiscal year.
But we're in the pool, so
You're in the pool. Wow.
we get.
You're special.
No, I'm just saying, they
Yeah.
spread it across the entire pool.
Yeah.
So it's not like.
No, but what I'm saying is the rate you earn is basically determined once a year, like 21.3%. You're gonna earn 21.3% on whatever amount of money you had in fiscal year 21. So you gave them the money June of 21, that means that you're only gonna earn it for half of the year. So conversely, if there's a loss, the timing of when you give them the money is important, is all I'm trying to get at. If they underperform, you're gonna wish you hadn't given them the money right when they can. But if they're still on a big trajectory of earnings, sooner is better. Who knows? I don't have the crystal ball.
But I know they're charging us 7%.
But they're charging you 7%. No matter what happens, you're gonna guarantee that part. The unfunded liability, as I like to say, is the best investment for PERS. Because no matter how they do in real estate,
They make
anything else,
7.5.
the unfunded liability, they just charge 7% and all the cities pay it.
Mike, I like this a lot. I still am a believer in doing a 115 trust. I would like, my 2 cents is, I like the idea of putting money into a 115 trust and then figuring out what it does to the general fund to try to do the 10-year amortization. I don't think my guess is we probably can't pull that off, but certainly the 15-year, and use the 115 trust, put it in now, it starts earning 3.5% or whatever, and use it to help get us from the curve we've already been planning on to the straight line 15 or 10-year amortization, which is a little higher payments now, but lower in the long run and straight line. And we use the money out of here to fill in those gaps on the front and back end of the curves. If we can pull that off, that's what I would personally like to see.
Well, let me run some scenarios of taking amortization basis to pay down, 10-year amortization, and not having too big of a increase in the general fund's contribution. Mix it up.
Did you say 10 and 15-year amortization?
Like I'll run it on both, but.
Yeah, and use that 5. Well, it's still 4, or is it, we already bumped it up to 5? The amount of money that we have set
There's
aside.
4 in there now.
There's 4 in there now.
And we've got 6 million excess unassigned fund balance.
So we owe it $1 million.
Well, of the 6 million,
Right. But yeah.
I'm trying not to also put money in the reserves right now while I'm still dealing with the American Rescue Plan and seeing how they're measuring things.
Good point.
So,
Any other discussion on agenda item 2?
I never got to the second plan. How bad is it? Is it small?
yeah, because it's new.
Yeah.
So
Just curious, what was it at?
their unfunded liability is $99,000. That's for almost half of our workforce now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That much?
How many? We've got the number of participants. So
That's
I
great.
meant item 2.
Under
Yes,
20.
I misspoke.
No, there's
Item 2.
26.
Is it more than 20 now?
I think it's 26.
The only other thought on this whole process is I think I mentioned it at the other meeting, but, you know, your public safety unfunded liability is in the contract, so. The
Yep.
city really has a large unfunded liability. because,
Huge.
One, you're just paying through this contract on police services, they have a huge unfunded liability, so. They just charge you for it.
Oh, yeah.
That's the 110% overhead.
Overhead.
We have 27 active employees in Pepper, so almost half of our workforce.
That's
Wow.
huge.
That helps a lot.
That helps. a
Yeah.
ton. Okay.
So,
No.
receive and file.
Yeah, receive and file, that's what we were asked to do, so, unless there's any other discussion. Are there any other staff reports this evening?
As I mentioned earlier, we have the carryover budget report on next week's agenda. I kicked myself last night when I started looking at our agenda. I should have thrown it in here. Got it done Friday. But anyway, so it's what we've talked about for the general fund, finished in good shape, and all of our other funds, same position, and we don't have any issues. We're in the middle of, when did the auditors show up?
October 18th.
So, getting ready for auditors to show up. Nothing stands out as being an issue with our finances.
That's great.
May I ask a quick question, Mike, on that, the one that's going to council? You talked earlier about you're gonna recommend that we don't sweep that unassigned fund balance over to the capital projects fund,
There's a discussion.
hopes and dreams fund. Would you consider that a deviation from our policy?
Yeah, and I mentioned, here, I'll read it. It's talking to our policy, that we believe the intent of the policy is when we have actual excess, unassigned fund balance at the end of fiscal year, that'll get transferred over to the fund. However, given the still uncertain impact of COVID-19 on city revenues as we move through FY22, particularly given a possible resurgence of infections this coming fall winter, staff recommends deferring to next spring the action on the policy requirement to transfer excess unassigned fund balance. So,
Just in case it comes up at the council, deviate. I want it to be hard. I want it to be difficult for the council to deviate from one of our fiscal policies. It should be very much an anomaly. I realize this is.
I want to put it as an action. I should it be an explicit action? So we need to add it.
And
Well, I agree. I think we'd actually have that discussion when we were
we
developing
had-
the policies.
yeah,
That it should actually be an action of the city council.
it should be an action of the city council to do it. I'm interested in the FRC's. We can't take action on that because it wasn't on our agenda, correct? But I think we can all get input from everyone here. I personally agree with doing it. I think it's prudent because we're still in uncertain financial times. But I'd like to hear what each of the financial.
I think it's
members
related
says.
to both the discussions we just had. so
Yes,
it's not
sure,
like it's not
right.
on the agenda.
But if anyone has any heartache with making that recommendation or the city council taking that action, I'd love to hear it from you guys.
I don't, I think it's a great idea, because we don't know what's gonna happen, and we need to be prepared, so. I mean, the staff has been great about keeping us prepared and on track, and obviously the numbers show that, so we should definitely keep that in mind.
Okay.
You don't agree, do you?
No, the unfunded pension liability for me throws the wrench in it. It's almost like, I know it's not said in the policy, but it's almost like if you've got a big unfunded pension liability, then are your reserves truly funded?
Yeah, because you have it, well, they are, so from a credit perspective, they are, because the reserves are there for economic downturns, emergency, you need liquidity cash.
Yeah.
And the liability, I mean, some people view it as, when do I run out of money? Like if I'm 70% funded, I run out of money in 2032, I'll worry about it then. I mean, you can look at it that way. I mean, that's not the prudent way to look at it, but you're not gonna run, it's not a problem today, it's a problem when you run out of money.
We have an expensive loan.
You have a very expensive loan. You're gonna run out of money eventually. It's like Social Security. If you don't do anything about it, you will run out of money. Eventually, some people are not gonna get their benefit if you don't do anything, but
There's a repayment plan that we're following.
cash is king. You gotta have the reserves
And
to have a,
Policy does speak to if we've got excess funds, that we should be looking at a lot of things, including unfunded liabilities. So,
What are you thinking?
I agree with you, I think it's
Okay.
fun,
Okay.
yeah.
Any other comments on that? Nobody else has any other comments, any committee reports? Our next regular meeting of the Financial Review Committee will be October 26th at 4 p.m. in City Council chambers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
for all
you.
that